Okay, today's chapter is chapter 7. It is the Moptops. On Sunday morning, I pulled back the curtain and saw clouds gathering as if they meant business. I hoped it wouldn't rain. Rain and organ music were the only two things that I could think of that made Punky cry. Probably because he associated them with monster shows on TV. After showering and washing my hair, I hid the shampoo out of habit, even though the bottle was brand new. I dressed in a light green blouse and a denim skirt with a ruffle on the bottom that did a fair job of hiding my skinny legs. Pulling the sides of my hair up into a barrette, I let the rest of it hang straight and loose down my back. In the living room, Punky was rolling crayons in his sawed-off table, watching TV, and trying to tune the static out of his radio. "Call the news," he said. "Don't want no way." I picked up the television and pretended to dial. "Hello? KRCG TV 13? This is Del Rita Jensen in Tanglenook. I'm calling for Mr. Punky Holloway, who is tired of you guys fooling around with the weather. He wants sunshine every day until Christmas, and then you can throw in a little snow." "What's that?" "Okay, I'll give him the message." "Oh, boy," said Punky as I hung up the receiver. "Snow, Christmas, Santa Claus." "The weatherman said to tell you they have to clean out the clouds once in a while, but they'll try not to do it on our house." "Thank you, DJ," replied Punky, selecting more crayons from his basket. Later, in the car on the way to church, I stared out the window of the back seat and let my thoughts wander. Why hadn't Avenel had friends in St. Louis? How long had her father been in jail? As we passed the school, Mom said, "It can't be much fun for Avenel being the new kid in 8th grade. You said yourself that school has so many cliques." She looked at me hopefully, her eyes asking me to please make friends with Avenel. Mom was 37 years old and didn't have one close friend. But what bothered her was that I didn't either. She hadn't ever had many friends, and she'd survived it. I would too. Mom was the oldest of 4 children, and life on the farm had been hectic after Grandpa died and Grandma went to work at a factory. I never had a chance to be a kid, she always said. I had to grow up too fast. Right after graduating from high school, Mom married Dad, who was 5 years older than she was. Shortly afterward, Grandma died and my folks moved into the farmhouse to take care of Punky, then 16, and the 2 younger children. Bert and Donna finished school and went their own ways, but Mom was left in charge of Punky. If she ever resented having all the responsibility, she never let on. But she sure made it rough on me. "I wanted to be different for you, Del Rita," she'd said a dozen times. "I want you to play tennis in the park, swim in the pool, join the scouts, and hang out with your friends." I must have been a disappointment to my mother. I'd never been very good at making friends or shown much interest in activities away from the farm. I'd gone to school because I had to, and every day I hurried home to play with Punky. I thought that maybe in Tanglenook things would be different, but now I was a total hermit. It felt terrible not being able to tell Mom the truth, that I couldn't make friends with Avenel because I was ashamed of Punky. thanks to Georgina's acting, as if he were a creature from Star Trek. Punky reached across the seat to straighten the ruffle on my skirt. I love you, DJ, he said, as he often did when I was blue. You love me? Sure do, handsome, I said, my mixed up emotions eating me alive. How could I love Punky and be ashamed of him at the same time? Punky grinned and adjusted his cowboy hat. He was wearing his best red jogging suit and new white sneakers that Mom had bought him at the children's department at Walmart, and he looked like one of Santa's roly-poly elves. I couldn't imagine what it was like. I couldn't imagine what it was about him that would scare anybody. Looks like there's a pretty good crowd today, Mom said as Dad drove into the parking area of Countryside Church. Yeah, Dad replied, shutting off the motor. Maybe 25, 30 people counting us and the preacher. I hope there's room for us to sit inside. Oh, Sam, said Mom, giving his arm a playful push. The church had only an old upright piano, so there was no organ music to make Punky cry. The congregation was mostly old folks, and the preacher's 3 preschoolers, and I were the only children. Sometimes I helped Mom teach the little ones, but usually I stayed in the sanctuary with the adults. Brother Hicks was standing at the top of the steps, shaking hands with people as they came in. Punky wasn't satisfied with just a handshake. He slapped the preacher on the back and said, "Hi, buddy," before going inside to greet everybody in sight. I smiled when he hugged Mrs. Myrtle Chambers and told her she was a pretty girl. Miss Myrtle Chambers was a tiny, stooped woman of about 80, but I knew what Punky meant by pretty. Everything about her reminded me of a delicate, antique doll. Onion skin flesh, faded blue eyes, wispy white hair, and a pastel dress that smelled faintly of lavender. Why, Punky, you make an old woman like me wish I was young again, said Mrs. Myrtle with a giggle. Hey, Punk man, that's my girl, boomed a voice behind me, and I turned and saw Uncle Bert. He and Aunt Queenie were members here too, because Aunt Queenie believed that families should worship together. She's my girl, you old goat, said Punky, placing his hands on his hips. My girl, Uncle Bert said over his shoulder as Aunt Queenie pulled him toward a pew. Catching up with Aunt Queenie, Punky said, Hi, pretty girl, and thumped her on the back. I didn't notice my aunt's reaction because just then I spied a whole row of carrot-colored Moptops in the center pew. It couldn't be, but it was. The Shackelford family. Avenel and her mother were trying to get the little ones to turn around and stop staring at us. Sitting close to the aisle was a boy I hadn't seen before, but he had to be Avenel's older brother. His orangey red hair was a tangle of curls, and the muscular arm resting along the back of the pew was spattered with freckles. Ronald McDonald! Cried Punky, striding up to the boy and tousling his woolly hair. As the boy glanced up in surprise, Punky ruffled his curls and said, Hi, buddy, down here, like Ronald McDonald. I grabbed Punky's arm and pulled him away and mumbled, I'm sorry. My face was on fire. The boy was grinning at me, and there was a twinkle in his eye. I've been called a ragtop and a frizzhead, But I've never been mistaken for a clown, he said. Hi, Velveeta, piped a voice, and I looked down the pew and saw 6 pairs of eyes fixed on me. Avenel was gazing curiously. Her mother was smiling, but Bertie was jiggling in her seat and waving. Velveeta? Said the boy, and I thought I had a strange name. Tree Zane. All my friends call me Tree. I couldn't even tell him my name wasn't Velveeta. My mouth felt crammed and with melted cheese, and my brain wouldn't work. Punky was straining to get away from me. At last, Mom took him to a seat a couple of rows down, and Dad shook hands with as many Shacklefords as he could reach. I wanted to run out of the church and never come back, but I knew that wouldn't work. Punky would just come looking for me, and I'd have some explaining to do to my parents. I crept up to sit beside Punky, who clapped his hands happily at being in church. The opening exercises seemed to last forever, with Punky singing the hymns off key into his pretend microphone. Every time somebody said amen, Punky responded with bang. The regular members had gotten used to it, but I figured the Shacklefords were laughing at Punky behind our backs. When the little kids were dismissed to go to their class, Brother Hicks asked everyone else to move forward. Tree came up and sat beside me, followed by his mother and Avenel. Punky snapped open his lunchbox to look at his treasures. The crayon pieces and the clowns rolled around in the box, and Punky punched me and pointed to show me that his flag was exactly like the one at the front of the church. I nodded, hoping that the Shacklefords were paying attention to the preacher and not to Punky. When the service was over, I couldn't escape because of the people on both sides of me. Avenel just smiled shyly, but her mother and Tree wanted to talk. I feel at home in your church, Del Rita, said Mrs. Shackleford as she folded her arms across her swollen stomach. I think we'll be back next Sunday. Del Rita Velveeta, Tree chuckled and glanced down at me. I studied his emerald eyes, but there was nothing to suggest that he would poke fun at Punky. You're the one who gave Bertie the whistle. Del Rita's in Avenel's class, explained Mother. I'm surprised you didn't see her at school. The 9th grade lockers are at the opposite end of the hall, replied Tree. Besides, the guys said Coach gets mad if we don't show up for football practice within 2 minutes after the last bell. Judging by the size of him, I should have guessed he was a football player. Let's see. Now I lost my place. Judging by the size of him, I should have guessed he was a football player. Now that I had gotten over my embarrassment enough to really look at him, I could see he was wearing a new blue and white jersey that said Tangle Nook Wildcats. I wondered if he had chosen to wear it because he was proud to be on the team or because it was the best shirt he had. His jeans were worn at the knees like the ones Avenel wore to school. Are you coming to the game Friday night? Asked Tree. I don't usually go to the games. I don't know that much about sports. Would he think I was an oddball if he knew I'd never even been to a game? As we moved out of the pew, the little Shacklefords came running up to their mother to show her the Bible pictures they'd colored. One of the kids pulled on her dress, stretching it tight across her middle. Punky followed me into the aisle and started teasing Bertie, running a hand through her curls and calling her Moptop. I expected her to scream and run, but she didn't. Instead, she stuck her thumb in her mouth and showed her picture to Punky, all the time looking at him with big, round eyes. Just when I was beginning to like his family, Punky did something to make me remember I was supposed to be invisible. He laughed, patted Mrs. Shackelford on the tummy, and said, "You're fat." The words felt like a slap across the face. I ran down the aisle, out of the church, and lunged for the car. It was suffocating because the sun had come out, and I cranked down the windows furiously. How stupid had I been to let my guard down, even for a minute, since I already knew my life could never be normal. Tree came to the door of the building and stood peering toward the parking lot. I slid to the floor and prayed that he wouldn't find me. Scrunching down with the floorboards gouging into my knees, I realized that I was being silly, hiding out like a criminal. Still, though, I stayed low. When I heard people talking and cars starting, I knew I had to get up. I eased upward and peeked out the window. A beat-up station wagon was pulling out of the lot, and a mop-top girl leaned out of the window and blew a farewell toot on a whistle. Miss Myrtle, who was being helped to a car by Elsie Golden, waved to Bertie. "Nice family," she said. "It's too bad the father didn't come to church with them. The mother looks worn out." "I should think so," chuckled Elsie. "I didn't think anybody but Catholics had that many kids anymore. And you could tell by looking at them that they're poor. Their clothes were clean, starched, and ironed," interrupted Mrs. Myrtle. "Not like some of the kids you see nowadays, who look like they've been run through the wringer." Good for you, Miss Myrtle, I thought, and then wondered why it made any difference to me.